Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritcraft, the podcast to nurture your soul and unleash the magic within. I'm your host, Marta, and today we're exploring the wonderful topic of sacred spaces. Maybe you're looking to cultivate peace or to enhance your spiritual practice, or maybe you're just simply trying to find a little corner of calm in your busy life. But whatever the reason, creating a sacred space can be very transformative. So, in this episode, we're going to explore how to infuse our homes and workspaces with intentionality and sacredness. We will look at what a sacred space is, some tips to help us create a sacred space, and I will share a couple of rituals that can bring that sacred peace into your life. So, the first thing is to figure out what a sacred space is, and essentially a sacred space is any space that transcends its physical area. So it can be deemed sacred via cultural tradition, or it can be personal as a place of worship, of meditation, reflection. A sacred space serves as a doorway to the divine or to a higher self and the source. Sacred spaces can be holy places, or it can be more like an intimate personal space that we have deemed sacred ourselves. Having a sacred space, a space dedicated to our spiritual growth, is key if we want to fully immerse ourselves in this journey of, self-discovery and spiritual enlightening. If we look at sacred spaces in our daily life, they also provide us with a respite from the busyness of life, from the chaos and the noises that we're subjected to in this modern world that we live in. These spaces then sort of become a refuge where we can find our inner calm and learn to trust our inner self again. These sacred spaces have been integral to various cultures and religions throughout history, and they've been serving as focal points for rituals and community gatherings. They're crafted with symbolic meanings, architectural features, and even natural elements that they all reflect the spiritual beliefs and the practices of these people who created them. So, as a little bit of historical context, basically we can see sacred spaces in many different cultures. From ancient Egypt, when we have temples like Karnak and Luxor, which were built to honor gods and pharaohs, and they were believed to be the dwellings of some of these deities on earth. The Greeks built these grand temples, like, for example, the Parthenon, which were dedicated to gods, and they also served as centers for communal worships and, civic life. Indigenous peoples in North America, they also consider natural sites like mountains, rivers, or even forests as sacred. And these places, they're not only seen as the homes of spirits, but also locations where important historical events occurred. And then we also have Asian different traditions like, I don't know how to pronounce this, the Ghats along the Ganges River in Varanasi. They're holy spaces for purification rituals and ceremonies for the dead, or the Shinto shrines in Japan, which are built in harmony with nature. So there's many different types of holy spaces, not only what we might have grown accustomed to see in a Western culture. All these spaces, they're full of symbolism. So as an example, in Christianity, many cathedrals have the shape of a cross as their floor plan, which obviously symbolizes the crucifixion of Jesus. So a lot of them, not only the shapes, but the way columns are placed, or which sort of rooms they might have, or alcoves, they all have very rich symbolism. They're of course used for ritual, but also for community places where people can gather for rites of passage, such as baptisms or weddings, funerals, different things. And they essentially are a bridge between our human realm and the divine realm. So they facilitate rituals that, they ask for blessings, for forgiveness, for guidance from spirit or from deities, whichever deity it is that obviously the space is devoted to. And finally, there's also sacred spaces, which are places for each individual, for meditation, for prayer. They allow people to connect with their own spirituality away from the distractions of everyday life. So how do we create a sacred space, you might be wondering? And well, this will depend on your living conditions, if you're creating one at home, and of course what you want to use the space for. If you're planning on simply lighting a candle to say a prayer for your ancestors, for example, a place like the kitchen or the living room could be perfect, because these two rooms are the ones where families tend to gather together in many cultures. So it would make sense to have that altar placed there, or that sacred space. But if, for example, the purpose of your sacred space is to become a place where you can relax and meditate, then maybe those two rooms that I mentioned above, they might not be the best places, because they can get very noisy, they get a lot of traffic, and while having a meditation room would be ideal, most of us, we don't have the luxury of that extra space, so we normally have to do with like a little corner in a quiet room. I've mentioned this before a few times. I used to have my ancestor altar in a corner in the corridor, and I barely paid attention to it because there was no space to sit down and relax. And it was kind of between the living room and the bathroom, so it just felt a little bit too open in the middle of the corridor, and it just felt weird. So I didn't spend much time at that altar. Now I've moved them in a prominent place in my living room, which means I can spend most of my time near them and I can talk to them throughout the day. So luckily I can have some extra space at home, so I have as well a small meditation area in the living room and a community altar, which I do have a community altar, and I'll explain more about that at the end of the episode. And then I am surrounded by all my plants. It has plenty of light. It feels very welcoming and very safe. So it makes sense for me. So basically what I'm trying to say with all of this is that you can have a sacred space literally anywhere, from a small shelf on top of a dresser in the bedroom to a little relaxing corner in the garden. And I don't want you to think of a sacred space as something that has to be big or, elaborate. It can have as many items or as few items as you want. And I have recently shared a blog post about how to create an altar. It's actually the first of two parts, and the next one will be released this Saturday. So if you want to learn a bit more about how to create an altar in a sacred space, I would encourage you to read those articles, and I will leave the details in the show notes. So the question might be, what do we need in a sacred space? And honestly, nothing, just your beautiful, magical self. A sacred space just can be as simple or as full of things as you want, as I said before, and it will essentially depend on what you will be doing in that space, what you want to use it for. But even said that, there are a few common things that people tend to have. So one of the things that many people have in their sacred spaces is an altar. And an altar is a focal point that we can use to direct our energy towards. So usually altars are decorated surfaces where we can perform magical works, or where we use like a prominent place to honor ancestors and deities, for example. And as I said, I have these creating altars on the blog, and then I will have another post coming out on Saturday. So that one on Saturday will be more about personalizing your own altar and a bit of a step-by-step guide on how to create one. But just know that having an altar is a choice. It tends to make things easier if you're going to use any items regularly, but you don't really need to have one. Another thing that tends to be quite common in sacred spaces is candles, and candles feature heavily in altars and sacred spaces. You've probably seen them in churches and temples, and we use them for light, for focus, for meditation, divination, or even to represent the element of fire and do spells. And, they not only serve as decoration, but they can also be used to signify the beginning and the end of a ritual. So you can always light it up at the beginning of that ritual to sort of like open that energetic portal if you want, and then just light it off at the end of whatever it is that you're doing. And as an example, if you use your sacred space for journaling, the simple act of always lighting up the candle signals to your subconscious that it's time to open up and delve into your innermost feelings. So that can help as well to ease into the different rituals that we perform. It's a way of telling our energy and source that we are ready for this session, let's call it. We also can be used candles for protection or to help us find the way if you're using some astral journaling. So depending what you're using your sacred space for, candles might be essential. So something to keep in mind. And of course, anytime that you use candles, I will always say that practice fire safety. So just be mindful whether they can be knocked over by children or pets. Make sure that you don't leave them unattended, that, there's nothing around it that can catch fire and all that sort of thing. Now, another thing that you might find featuring quite heavily in sacred spaces are crystals. So even though I'm saying crystals here, I am gonna talk about stones. Crystals are very popular, obviously, and they have all different characteristics and strengths, but because it's becoming so trendy to own crystals and you can find them pretty much anywhere, it's becoming a little bit tricky to find out ethical sellers of crystals at an affordable price. So I'm not trying to judge anyone. I do have crystals myself. I like them. They're beautiful and they have different energies and I can use them for different things and situations. But personally, I've decided not to buy any more crystals myself, mainly because I find it very difficult to figure out which ones are good and which ones are coming from different areas where I don't think they have an ethical trade. So if you want to use crystals in your sacred space, that's perfectly okay. But please do your research and find reputable sellers. On my main altar, I have crystals and I use them for spells and rituals every so often. To be honest, I don't use crystals that often. I think I have them more for decoration. But on my meditation and Reiki altar, I don't have any. So it is quite interesting because the one thing that I seem to have almost in all kind of 4 altars that I have is rocks and stones. So on my meditation altar, I have a stone that is from my garden and it helps strengthen my connection with the earth. And because, as I said, the stone is from my own garden, it also helps me return home when I'm doing any sort of astral work. So sometimes you might find that while crystals are pretty, they can feel very different from their sort of like definition, characteristics and energies. You will interact in different ways with them. Some crystals that are very popular might do absolutely nothing to you. Usually when we use stones, for example, from our area, we tend to have a much more stronger connection. They can be used more for grounding, protection, and many other different things. So don't discount the unassuming pebble that you might find on a walk. So if you opt for crystals, just think of what the sacred space is going to be used for and what it represents and what it honors so that you can choose crystals according to it. So for example, one of the most popular crystals is going to be clear quartz, which is known as the master healer. And this one amplifies energy, it amplifies thought, and it also amplifies the effect of other crystals. Then you have something like amethyst, which is a stone for spiritual protection, for purification. It can help with meditation. It also helps with certain addictions, it seems. So you might find that you can use that sort of thing for when you have certain bad habits that you want to get rid of. So it can be an extra tool in your toolbox. Rose quartz, which is often called the stone of love, that promotes self-love. It promotes deep inner healing, feelings of peace, and it's a very nice, I don't want to say gentle, but it's a very kind of nurturing crystal, I find. Citrine is one of my favorite crystals. It's known as the merchant stone, and it brings joy and wonder and enthusiasm, and is really good for manifesting abundance. Then you have other crystals like black tourmaline, which is very powerful as a protective stone, and it can ward off negative energy and it can help with grounding. So then you have selenite, for example, which is perfect for cleansing, and it helps with charging other crystals. It also helps promote peace and mental clarity. Then you have smoky quartz, which is very grounding, and it neutralizes negative vibrations, and it helps to detoxify on many different levels. And for example, then you have something like carnelian, which helps with boosting confidence and courage and creativity. So it's very good when you are procrastinating or when you feel apathetic or something like that. So keeping an eye on what you want that sacred space to be, you can think of what sort of crystals you might want to use. And of course, this is just but my own take and summary of some of these crystals. There will be some sources that are going to have different definitions or different characteristics for each of these crystals, and they might have even more. And of course, there's many more crystals, so do your research and see what resonates. The last thing that you're going to find in a sacred space is sacred objects. And of course, these objects are going to depend, again, on what you're using your sacred space for. For example, if you're using that space for journaling, you are going to probably leave your journal and a pen in your sacred space. Or if you're using it for meditation, maybe you're going to have some incense or a bell or something similar. So if your sacred space is going to be used for divination, then your tarot deck or whichever divination tool you're going to use is going to remain there. The main thing about a sacred object is that the object is only used for its sacred purpose. So for example, if you use a knife to perform rituals such as cord cutting, you don't want to use that knife again in the kitchen. Once an object has been given a sacred purpose, it should remain as such. So some of the objects that you are likely going to find in a sacred space are an altar, which is a dedicated space or surface for placing sacred items, it's used for worship, for rituals, and for meditation. So you're going to have candles as well, which obviously we've mentioned earlier as elements to have on your altar, on your sacred space. But as you can imagine, candles are popular and you will find them in many sacred spaces. They are used to symbolize light, clarity, intention, and just remember that candles can represent different things based on their colors, and they will have different energies, different purposes. You might want to use incense, which is normally burned because of the scent. Incense is believed to purify the space, to enhance meditation, to connect with the spiritual realm. Just remember that if you cannot use incense, you can use other types of fragrances, like you can use your favorite fragrance for that as well. Herbs, so you're going to find herb bundles or herb wands. Herbal wands. Basically, these are for smoke cleansing. So you can use a smoke ritual to cleanse a space of negative energy and invite positive vibes. So you can use any herbs that you have local to you. So you probably have heard sage being mentioned, but I would recommend that you do research on the plants that are native to your area and try to use some of those. Like for example, I use rosemary quite a lot, and there are other herbs that you might find a much stronger connection with. We've mentioned earlier crystals or stones, so they're used for their various metaphysical properties and they will enhance energy or help with healing, with intentions, etc. Tarot and oracle cards, which are used for divination and guidance. So whichever it is that you will whichever your preference, basically. You're also going to find as well statues and figures, which are going to be representing deities or spiritual beings. They might represent animals. They will represent as well other symbols that will hold personal significance. Sacred texts. So these are any kind of books or writings that are considered holy or that are spiritually significant. And this could be like the Bible, the Quran, or any other spiritual literature. You might have a chalice. Depending again on what your traditions are, you might have some sort of like glass or cup or chalice, which is going to be. You can also have a chalice, which is like a ceremonial cup, and this will depend again of the type of sacred space that you are creating. So, for example, in the Catholic Church, the chalice is used to do the communion with the wine. And obviously in Wicca and witchcraft and other pagan traditions, the chalice represents the element of water. In that same vein, you can have a pentacle, which is a 5-pointed star with a circle, and that symbolizes earth and protection. You can have feathers, for example, which some people use for their smoke rituals, for the smoke cleansing. They can also symbolize talking to the spiritual realm. As I mentioned earlier, you can use a knife, a ritual knife, which depending on which tradition you follow. If you are following Wicca, it is called the athame. And again, it's a ceremonial blade, so it can be used to perform various rituals and to represent the element of fire, although sometimes it can also represent the element of air. Bells are a very popular item as well, which are normally rung to clear negative energy. You can also use them to signify the beginning and the end of the ritual. And then another thing that is quite common as well is prayer beads, which can be rosary or mala beads, and basically they're used to counting, they're used for counting prayers or doing chants and mantras. So basically they help you to add an element of focus to your meditation. But I just want you to remember that no matter the type of sacred space that you have, it's important that you make it your own. So, for example, I have different items in my sacred spaces, all depending on what I use the space for. In my meditation and Reiki altar, I have a rock, a stone basically, which is from my garden, as I mentioned earlier, and I decorated it by wrapping it with some cord. I also have a dandelion, which is already, bloom into seed. So I have it inside a jar. I have candles, of course, and I have lots of plants because I feel safe and calm when I'm surrounded by plants. Next to it, I also have a small statue of the Virgin Mary as the archetype of the mother. And basically, I made a small shrine to it, to the statue, inside a lantern or like a terrarium. But that is very different from what I have in my ancestor altar. In my ancestor altar, for example, I have things that remind me of my grandparents. I have pictures of them, of course. I have some flowers. I have some pearl necklaces. I have the smoking pipe of my granddad, one of them. And then I have the powder makeup from one of my grandmas, and I have a rosary in there as well. So it will all depend. And some of these items I don't actually use for rituals. They're just representations of the people that I want to connect to. So as I said, just make it your own. And just because you place something in your sacred space, it doesn't mean that it has to stay there forever. Of course, you want to only use it for your sacred rituals. You don't want to be using something, for mundane things. But then again, it all depends, because if your sacred space is your kitchen, for example, and you are honoring your ancestors because they, used to love cooking and you honor them by baking bread or making very, very good traditional meals, then all your sacred items are going to be very likely the items that you're going to be using for cooking. So it all depends on the kind of, on the type of sacred space that you have and how you plan to use it. So before you start setting your actual sacred space, it is important that you declutter and you cleanse the area. So clutter doesn't allow for the energy to flow, and when we are in a very messy and clutter surrounding area, our own mental health can suffer. And I know if you're having issues with your mental health, it is very difficult to tidy and to clean. I completely understand that. So I would just say you don't have to go crazy into cleaning the whole house if you don't have that kind of energy, but at least the surface that you're using as an altar within your sacred space, try to keep it tidy and clean, just because you want to make sure that you welcome the type of energy that you want in that sacred space. So it's very important to declutter, as I said, because an uncluttered area is going to allow the energy to flow freely. So you can also cleanse the area, and I would definitely recommend cleansing the area, especially depending on which area of your house, or if you're using a small sacred space like a small altar at home. If you're having like a small altar and a small sacred space at work or something like that, I would definitely recommend to cleanse the area. You can do this by using a smoke bundle, a smoke wand. If a smoke cleansing is your thing, there are different herbs and different incenses that you can burn for smoke cleansing. You can also use sound for this, and it can be something like a bell, for example. If you're feeling that the energy is very stagnant and you're not entirely happy or comfortable with the energy there, you can just make a lot of noise to kind of like clear the area. And it's very interesting because, I mean, worst case scenario, you can just literally grab a couple of pods and you can just grab a couple of pans and pots and just clang them together. Just to make sure that any energy that you don't want there is actually disappearing. You can actually tell the energy to, get out of your sacred space. But obviously you can also use bells, you can use bowls and different sounds that might be a bit more appealing to the ear. And And once the area is cleansed, then it's important to set your intention for the space. So what I mean by this is, if you're going to be using your altar for meditation, or you're going to use it to connect to your deities or your spirit court, or maybe as a way of honoring your ancestors, whatever you're going to be using your sacred space for, is very important to sort of like tell the space and the energy that that's what you're going to be doing. This could be as simple as creating a peaceful environment or a place for meditation. So you want to make sure that you welcome the energy that you want to attract. You might want to do a little consecrating ritual. On a day-to-day basis, you can just create smaller rituals, such as lighting a candle every day, or maybe saying a prayer, and that's going to help maintain that energy that you're after for your sacred space. My advice here is not to overthink it, because sometimes the place that you feel that recharges you and helps you, ground you, is probably already kind of a sacred space. So it's just a matter of making it official, if you like. If you're at work, for example, and you want to create a small sacred space, you can use a part of your desk, so it doesn't have to be very big. Again, if you're working from home, it's much easier, but if you work in an office, you're not going to be able to have a whole meeting room for yourself just to relax. Although some offices, some companies do offer some meditation and prayer rooms. But of course, you have to share them with other people, so that's not going to be your sacred space. But what you can do is, again, just place a couple of stones or crystals on an area of your desk. You can have a small, obviously, you're not going to have a candle, but maybe you can have a reed diffuser or something that can evoke some scent that helps you calm, or whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to have the space for motivation, maybe you can use some citrine and have some motivational quotes. And essentially it's a way of directing your energy towards that small space. You can also have portable sacred spaces, which many times you can have them in a small pouch or in a small tin, for example, and they're very famous all over the internet, the Altoid tins. And essentially, this is just a way of having everything that you need wherever you go. So I used to have, well, I still have it. I don't really use it, but I used to have a small portable altar in a tissue metal tin. And if I remember, I will share it on Saturday's blog, a picture of it. And yeah, it's very interesting because I've traveled with that to Spain and everything, and I have there everything that I need to create a small altar wherever I go. So basically, I just want you to remember that integrating your sacred space into your daily life is about creating habits that nurture your spirit. You might want to spend a few minutes each morning meditating or journaling, or you just simply want to sit quiet in reflection and enjoy those moments of peace. But regularly connecting with your space is going to help you reinforce your intentions, and it will bring a sense of peace and grounding for your day. So before I finish off with today's episode, I mentioned earlier about the community altar. So this is something that I do for the community, and it is completely free. So I have a community altar in my meditation and Reiki space. And what I do with this is every month, at the beginning of the month, I cleanse the area and I sort of like make it all nice and welcoming for your petitions. So what you can do is through the website, you can send in your petitions and I will add them to this community altar. So the idea is that I can give something back to the community with my own energy. You can find all the details on the website, and I will post the link in the show notes. So this is all from me today. So just to finish, just to remind you that creating a sacred space is a beautiful way to bring more mindfulness and more and a better spiritual connection into your daily life. And I hope today's episode has inspired you to sort of like create your own little sanctuary. I would love to hear about your sacred spaces and any rituals that you've created. So please feel free to share your experiences with me. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with your friends and just tell everyone about it. Help me reach as many people as possible. So once again, just to remind you, just check the show notes for resources and for the links to help you on your journey. Until next time, just keep staying curious and keep nurturing your spirit.